Hello everybody and welcome to Nathan on Shuffle and to a very special episode today. This is one of those episodes where I'm going to talk about several different albums all in a row, kind of do a short synopsis of what to expect of these albums, and leave it to you to go check them out if you want. So these are going to be short recommendations, 20 albums that I've been listening to for the first half of this year that I've been enjoying but haven't yet covered on the show for various reasons. Either haven't gotten around to it or didn't feel like I had enough to say for a long form review, but I still enjoyed it. And these are always fun shows for people, I think, to be able to have a lot of cool new music to look at. So hopefully you guys will appreciate this format. I'll try to put up the album covers along the way so that you can see what it looks like, and I'll put the band and album titles in the description as well so you can look it up in your own time if you're interested in checking out these albums. I'm kind of clearing out the attic a little bit of all these albums that I've had on my radar over the first half of this year, but just haven't gotten to, and I just kind of want to clear it out and start the rest of this year fresh. It's a little bit of like covering all the albums that I'm interested in from the first half of the year, even though we're a little past the halfway mark, but that's okay. I just wanted to bring some attention to these great albums that I really love from this year so far. So this is just going to be an alphabetical order by the artist name, so hopefully you'll enjoy some of these. Several of these will be probably albums you're familiar with and have wondered why I haven't covered yet on the channel, and so hopefully this will be a good catch-all of all of the things that I think are worthy of attention and praise from this year. So first we have Airbag and their album The Century of the Self. This is a pretty recent album released in June this year. This is a band from Norway, formed in 2004. They have some notable albums released in their catalog. They're one of the more well-known artists, I think, on this list. This is their 6th studio album. Obviously, there's a bit of a Pink Floyd influence here, a bit more atmospheric and dreamy in its scope. You know, I feel like it has a lot in common with bands like Anathema. Return to the Earth had an album this year that kind of has a similar style, where it's not really furiously technical playing or anything, but it's just really great soundscapes, really cool ear candy, great production values, these long extended tracks, David Gilmour-esque guitar soloing, great vocal qualities, very mature and polished, and just a wonderful sound. A lot to uncover in the sonic qualities of this album. You get a lot you can latch onto as you listen to over and over again, and it's just really grown on me over time. At first, sometimes this kind of music can kind of feel a bit too monotonous and too long form, and my attention wanders a bit because I like things that I could grab hold of that are more quick paced and a little bit more adventurous and interesting. But I think there's a lot to really grab hold of on this record, and it's really grown on me over time, so I really appreciate this one and definitely wanted to mention it in my list here. Next we have Alcest and their album Les Chants de l'Aurore. This is experimental post-metal from France. This band was formed in the year 2000. Started out a bit more harsher black metal from my understanding, but have since incorporated more of this like shoegaze and experimental post-black metal elements to their sound. So I was a little bit worried going into this because obviously black metal isn't really my thing. And I don't really care for the aggressive, harsh vocals that a lot of those bands do. But a lot of my friends and fellow YouTubers were really big on this band and told me that this was a safe place to go to. And it is definitely a safe album for those of you who may be like me, interested in metal, but not really a fan of the more aggressive growling vocals and stuff. This has maybe a touch of it, but it's very light. Mostly you get a lot of really expansive, majestic sounds, this really cool post-metal style. Sometimes it can be a bit droning and monotonous, but there's a sense of majesty, these soaring moments that are uplifting in this metal context. I think it's really an interesting juxtaposition, because oftentimes I associate metal with more darker, heavier, moodier sounds, but they manage to use that style, but in a more uplifting fashion with this almost pastoral kind of feel, but in a heavier vein. And I think it's really great. There's some great French vocals throughout this, some great harmonies, great lush metal soundscapes that I keep coming back to, and think this is a very awesome album and makes me interested in their catalog in full that I haven't heard yet. So next I have Aurora Clara and their album 4. This is obviously their fourth studio album. They've had Transformation in 2019, Clear Dawn in 2022, and Dreams in 2023. This is jazz fusion from Madrid, Spain. Just fantastic instrumental music. Great jazz and Canterbury vibes to this. The opening epic track, The Last Candles, is just a fabulous listen. Monster players, there's some great flute soloing throughout the record. There's a bit of this almost flamenco style that they incorporate in as well. Being from Spain, I think they bring part of their heritage into this music, and it adds such a great layer of sound to their music. I just really love this. There's almost a funky vibe in a track like Five Sisters. That flamenco style I'm mentioning, you can hear in Song to John. Just a really cool instrumental record. And this is a band that's just very consistent. Every album of theirs is really showcases a lot of their talent and instrumental fireworks. Just a great band if you're into that jazz fusion sound. I think you can't go wrong with their catalog of music. And now we move into the Bardic Depths, What We Really Like in Stories, that came out back in March. This is crossover prog from the UK. You could call it a little bit of neo-prog. I would say it kind of is in line with like what Big Big Train does. Very pastoral sounding, very beautiful. The concept of this album is kind of interesting because it is a loose theme about different authors and their stories and different quirky things about these different authors and their genres. You get authors being mentioned like Alan Moore, Ray Bradbury, Robert E. Howard, Willa Cather, Walter Miller Jr., C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, and Robert Rankin, so some really great literary favorites there. Nothing too original in this music, but very classy and well-performed prog music. Very much a pleasure to listen to. I really like Peter Jones on vocals, and they introduce a little cool elements here and there, some sax soloing and such, some 12-string guitars like Genesis style on You've Written Poetry, My Boy. The final track, Whispers in Space, brings a little bit of a heavier edge with some like bluesy guitar licks, some jazzy sax thrown in for good measure, a good way to close the record. Just beautiful music if you're into Big Big Train and don't mind a bit more of a laid-back, pastoral kind of sounding record with great melodies. I think this is a great record to look at, a great prog record from this year. Next, we have the Cyberiam and Unobtanium. This is from May this year. Heavy prog from the U.S. They were founded in Chicago in 2018. I reviewed and really loved their previous record, Connected, from 2021. They have a very polished sound. You know, they have a lot in line with classic Rush, you would say. Maybe a bit of like modern edged Porcupine Tree. There's a heavier bent to their sound. They could get into near prog metal stylings in their instrumental work, but they have some really nice ballads as well. Keith Semple is the vocalist, and he has an incredible voice as well. So it's a really great blend of some really laid back, beautiful ballads, but some really impressive heavy prog with some great instrumental fireworks. I think it can be enjoyed by pretty much anyone. It's a really cool album. It's compact. It's a fairly short record, but every track has something unique and interesting on display, and they do well in balancing these two different flavors to their sound, the more heavy-edged stuff that they do, but also some more laid-back stuff focused on melody and great hooks. I really enjoy their music and think this is well worth checking out. Next, we have Eric Gillette and Sensory Overload. This came out in June. Progressive metal, of course, from the guitarist of the Neil Morse Band, one of my favorite musicians in modern prog. And this is just heavy instrumental prog music, you know, very much progressive metal vein. And you get a cool gamut of sounds within this progressive metal style throughout the record. You get, you know, some stuff that's pretty heavy and dark, like I believe it's called Kongzilla. You get more dynamic prog, which owes a lot more to like Pink Floyd and stuff like that in Godspeed. And you get almost a bit of funkiness in the equation with something like Tesla Coil. So there's these really cool prog metal instrumentals. Eric Gillette, of course, it's a focus on the guitar, so that's the driving instrument here. But he's a multi-instrumentalist. He does all of the instrumental work here. Everything's done by him. So you get some really great keyboard leads. You get some really cool drumming and bass work. So it's just a really satisfying listen, but not too off the mark of what you might expect from like a progressive metal solo album from a guitarist. I think it's right in that lane, but it's done really well, expertly played. He's one of the best in the business at playing these instruments and doing this style, I think. And I'm always curious to hear what he's got going on and what he can do in this genre in the future. So since the Neil Morse Band has been on a bit of a hiatus for quite some time, it's nice to hear that he's still going strong and doing great music, both with Temic, which came out last year, that he's a part of, but also with his solo work that he's continuing to pursue. So really great record if you like that instrumental prog metal style. Next, another instrumental album, Focus, and their album Focus 12 that came out in July, so recently. This is symphonic prog from the Netherlands. Of course, Focus is a very legendary band in the prog genre. They've been around since the early 70s with their Focus 2 album in 1971, 3 in 1973, and of course Hamburger Concerto is another big release from them in 1974. So they have a lot of classic records in the prog canon. And this is just a really pleasant listen. It's all instrumental, but beautifully done. A lot of great flute playing and keyboard work, as you'd expect, from their head honcho, who of course is Thies van Leer, incredible instrumentalist. And, you know, there's certain songs that are a bit more laid back in their vibe, some stuff that's a bit more exciting and fresh and interesting, but it still stays in their lane of this like symphonic prog instrumental work. I really like some of the keyboard playing, some of these like jazzy piano interludes that happen like in Bella and Bowie that really lean into this like jazz piano aesthetic, but they always bring back this kind of more energetic prog styling that I really like, and they never stray too far from their core sound here and just do it really fabulously well. For a band that's a bit older and more in that classic vein, I think they're really doing a great job bringing new music to the table that still sounds fresh and exciting. So definitely worth a listen. This is probably one of the more quirky or weird ones on my list, but I've been really liking a band called Good NightOwl. This album is called Live in ADHD from June. They also had a previous album from earlier this year called Belief. This is really the project of a comedy persona from the U.S., Daniel Cups. I'm not too familiar with his comedy work, but apparently he has some comedy stuff that he's done. And it does have a bit of a poppier sensibility than a lot of the other things on this list, but there's a bit of a quirky feel in what they're doing. It's like mixing this kind of 80s synth pop sound with a bit of like world music vibes. You know, a lot of you get some Spanish sounding guitars and you get some almost reggae feel in some of the beats. So it makes for a very interesting, quirky listen. Great vocal hooks all the way throughout the record. Definitely has that pop vibe if you're kind of not a fan of pop music and, you know, those kind of beats and that kind of an energy. This might not be for you. But I think it's doing that sort of music, but in a unique and quirky, proggy way that makes it more palatable for me, who also isn't always into that kind of pop music. But I really liked this. I like their previous album. Capital as well from last year is an interesting listen, which reminded me a bit of like the Deer Hunter in spots. But I really like what they do. I think it's an interesting project, and it showcases that there's interesting poppier music being played out there that's being made. So something I wanted to bring attention to and thought that some subset of listeners might appreciate that. Hourglass, Voids and Visions is the next one, progressive metal from the US. This is a band, their previous album called Oblivious to the Obvious came out in 2009. It was an album that I was pretty obsessed with when it came out because I was right at the right timing of my love for progressive metal, and coming across this really expansive record with a lot of epic pieces on it was really a fun listen. It was a bit raw and unpolished, admittedly, but I think it had some really cool ideas, some really funky bass grooves and interesting things going on. So now they come back 15 years later with a new album called Voids and Visions, which is just 4 tracks, but each one is really long, there's some 20-minute epics here, so it's a fairly long record, and maybe not quite up to the quality of Oblivious to the Obvious to me. They've made some lineup changes that I'm not sure I'm completely on board with, but overall you get a lot of cool progressive metal here that goes through a lot of different moods and movements throughout these different pieces. It's really complex in spots. Some great guitar work from Brick Williams, who's been in the band since the beginning. There's some cool synth parts, cool riffs, cool solid drum work. I think the instrumental of this music is really well done. The vocalist is maybe a bit of an acquired taste and hasn't really been connecting with me quite as much. But beyond that, and he does have some cool moments. I think it's not totally a waste, but I really appreciate the musicianship on board. I like the adventurous nature of all these expanded pieces. If you like classic prog metal, kind of like DT and Fate's Warning, maybe this could be for you. Some certain sections maybe meander a bit. Maybe they could be tightened up, you could argue. But it's just really solid playing from some great progressive metal musicians. And I really had a fun time with this record. So I thought I'd present it to the audience here. Another one a little bit off the beaten path here, we've got Low Moon and their album I Wish You Way More Than Luck. This is art pop / indie rock from the US. This band started in 2016 and this is their third studio album. And yeah, this is probably the farthest away from the prog that I tend to talk about, but I don't think it's that far away because it's very artsy, very intricate pop music that I think is supremely well done. A very intelligent sound to them, brings in influences from like classic 70s and 80s pop, maybe brings to mind some classic 80s bands like Peter Gabriel was a reference point that really stuck with me, Simple Minds, Talk Talk. Great, lush, gorgeous melodies here, strong hooks, great musicianship at play. Love the vocalist. His voice is just really, really pleasant. It makes me think about early like Coldplay a little bit as well, but a little bit more sophisticated, more complexly arranged. This is, to me, the epitome of what I think modern pop music should and could be. I wish this was what you'd hear more often on mainstream radio and things like that. Just so many great earworms, well-constructed tracks, lots of layering, gorgeous melodies. Every track is interesting and intricate, and there's just beautiful things to behold here. I just love beautiful sounding music, and I think that's what you get here. Like layers and gorgeous things happening all across the board. Great production. Just, it sounds fantastic, and I've just fallen in love with this record, so I had to mention it somewhere on my channel. So Low Moon, I Wish You Way More Than Luck. Definitely check it out if you're into that sort of a style and sound. Next we have Magic Fig. This is actually a self-titled EP, the first release from this band, a psych band from San Francisco, California. And it's really cool what they've done here. It is definitely a throwback to like late 60s, early 70s psychedelic sounds. You get a little bit of that early 70s prog rock in the mix, maybe some Canterbury style. Great hooks, memorable vocal harmonies, a very vintage aesthetic. This is a record that kind of sounds like it could be plucked out of the late 60s, early 70s. But it definitely has something in line with kind of modern day indie rock as well, a bit with maybe like the female vocalist and her style. But it's just very dreamlike. There's some choral vocals, some Moog pitch bends. They have a really cool Technicolor type sound to them. Some bright pop and psychedelia mixed together. It reminds me a little bit of In Vibe, Plantoid that I reviewed earlier this year that I've talked about. I think their record, Terrapath, is excellent and has a similar like indie rock but done in a vintage style sound. Maybe that's leaning more towards a jazzier side, where this is more of into the psych side of things, but they both blend and blur those lines a bit as well. But it's just a really beautiful record, maybe a bit more poppy than what the traditional prog fan might tend to listen to, but I think it has enough interesting instrumental work going on that could appeal to a prog fan who appreciates the kind of psychedelic sounds of the 60s and 70s. So definitely a high recommendation. I really love that record. The next one is Marco Glühmann, A Fragile Present. This is neo-prog / singer-songwriter music from Germany. This is the vocalist of German neo-prog band Sylvan, who've been around for quite some time in this space. I did a review of their previous album 1 to 0 in 2021. One of my favorite bands and has been for quite some time, so I was curious to check out this solo record by their lead vocalist. And it's about exactly what you'd expect, just beautiful melodies, beautiful vocal work, very emotional and emotive, a mix of like art rock and sophisticated pop once again. And I love Marco's voice. I think he's a fabulous vocalist, one of the best in the neo-prog scene for sure. And of course, this isn't quite as proggy as Sylvan can get. This is much more singer-songwriter and, once, like I said, more poppier in its aesthetic. but I think it's really expertly crafted and just has so many great performances. His vocal performance in particular is just super grand, and he has this really expressive voice that I just can't get enough of. Very well balanced music, very well produced, has great emotional swells when it needs to, can be a bit more subdued at those points when it makes sense in the music. So another fabulous record, a great solo record by a fabulous artist. Definitely check that one out. Another solo record that I enjoyed was from Martin Gonzalez called Suspiro. This is from the guitarist of OK Goodnight, which is a band that I reviewed as well from last year. The Fox and the Bird was one of my favorite records, and this has some of those feels as well embedded into it, but I think it's done in a bit more modern aesthetic. You think of bands like, like artists like Pliny, Richard Henshaw's solo work, stuff like that. Adds a bit of electronica into the mix with a lot of ambient atmosphere and a lot of electronic beats and synths and the musical texture, but he's able to showcase his excellent guitar playing and skill throughout. But I think it's cool. I think this is more branded as an EP, but it's, to me, almost just as long as a full length should be. And I think it showcases a lot of diversity of talent. He has a vocalist on a couple tracks who does, Elizabeth Hull is her name, and she also guested on The Fox and the Bird. She has some of those more aggressive growling vocals at times, so if you're really not into that, you may hear a little bit of it here and there, but it's only on a couple tracks, and she also does some great clean singing as well. And beyond that, it's more instrumental, and he's got some other guest stars, Sink Eason on piano, and also Zach Zinger on some sax, so you get some saxophone soloing as well throughout these different tracks. So a lot of great diversity of sound, but showcasing his ability on guitars, and I think it's just a fabulous little EP here that showcases a great young talent. So hopefully he'll release more great music like this. Another solo art, we got kind of a three-fer here. Another solo act, Matt Page, and his album Apocalypse Garden came out back in May. This is the guitarist / vocalist of Dream the Electric Sleep, and I reviewed their album American Mystic last year, which was one of my favorite albums of last year. I really love that record because I think they blend a really cool, like, modern melodic rock sensibility with little touchstones of prog to make for a good balance. And I think Matt Page does much the same thing on this solo record. A little bit more poppier, a little bit less prog, a little bit more singer-songwritery, but it's definitely has that sound of Dream the Electric Sleep and has some great melodies, a little bit of Americana and folk mixed into the sound as well. Intelligent rock music with great melodies, harkens back a little bit to like great Beatles type sounds, maybe a bit of power pop, a bit of that like Jellyfish style. Really a pleasant listen, a great solo record once again that I think is well worth checking out, especially if you like Dream the Electric Sleep. I think this is right in line with that sound. Of course, with his vocals, it sounds like definitely in the same wheelhouse. And I always like this kind of thing. As you can see by this list in general, I like when prog and pop kind of makes, and you get really accessible hooks, but also cool, really well-written, intelligent music behind it. And I think that's an expertly crafted marriage of music for me. Next, I have Prehistoric Animals and their album Finding Love in Strange Places. This is heavy prog from Sweden. The band was founded in 2015, so they're a fairly newer band. This is heavy prog, but it has a bit of like an 80s synth influence into its music. Think like a band like Voyager. Catchy hooks thrown in. There's some poppier moments and melodies, but still has this heavier aesthetic at times, bordering into progressive metal as well. Feels very sci-fi in its aesthetic and theme. This is probably taken a bit from its cover art as well. A bit steampunky, cool 80s futuristic sound and style. It's a supremely solid album to listen to if you like heavy prog bordering on metal, but with catchy 80s synths. I think that's the best way to describe it. And it ends with an interesting Christmas theme song called Nothing Has Changed, But Everything Is Different. I'm always looking for like cool, different, interesting Christmas songs that are in a prog style, so that's one that's going to be definitely added to the list. But just incredible musicianship, really solid production, great vocalist. I think it's just a solid record that a lot of people would love and enjoy if they listen to it. So definitely one to check out. Next, I have Rendevupoint and their album Dream Chaser. This is progressive metal from Norway. Their previous albums were Solar Storm in 2015 and Universal Chaos in 2019, so once again a fairly recent band. It features Bard from Leprous on the drums, so there's a bit of a connection there, and you can hear a bit of that Leprous sound in their music, but I feel like, once again, they have kind of a poppier, more catchy approach in their music with almost some 80s synth sounds as well. Just similar to the band I just talked about, you could hear a bit of Voyager or maybe even Muse in their sound. It's really fun, catchy music, but done in a darker progressive metal way. I think it's a really interesting sound, and they explore a lot of interesting varieties. And it's a fairly short album, so it's easy to get through and has a lot of catchy melodies to hook into. So if you like progressive metal but are looking for something a bit more catchier and upbeat, this could be for you. I like that it's kind of a shift from a lot of the more darker, heavier, moodier progressive metal bands, and it just ended up being a really fun listen. Another great progressive metal album, this is Terrae and their album Eli, A Wonderful Fall from Grace, progressive metal from Australia. They've been around for quite some time. They started in 1993 as Terror Maze with more of a thrash-based sound, but they since changed their name, kind of adopted more of a Christian prog metal style, and now they're back with this really cool record. They're pretty prolific. They've released several records in the last several years. Very polished, melodic, progressive metal. Very good sound to this record. Great production values. Excellent vocals. Great instrumental playing. It has hooks galore. You can catch on to a lot of different things in the mix. A lot of cues from classic prog metal from the 90s and early 2000s. I also get a vibe of like Seventh Wonder as well. Really expert players, really great sounds to them. It's like taking this 90s progressive metal and giving it more of a modern production sheen. Lots of epic soaring moments. I like that they focus more on melodies rather than flashy playing. There's not a lot of like crazy Dream Theater style, virtuoso instrumental crazy moments. It's more just like grounded in this very melodic style. And there's an excellent epic at the end that adds a dash of sax to the mix, which I think adds a good element. Because if there's any complaints I could levy towards this, it sounds a bit samey at certain points throughout the record, and I wish there was maybe a bit more of a proggy variety, but they do their job there by adding a bit of saxophone and making the epic at the end a little bit different in texture and sound. But it's a really cool record. It's a concept record. I believe it's the third in a series of concept records, but it's a really cool listen and just super polished, pristine, good sounding progressive metal music that I think a lot of fans of the genre will love. All right, a couple more here. The next one's kind of an interesting, quirky one. This is Tyler Kamen with Cornucopia Modus. This is psychedelic space rock from New York in the U.S. He started self-releasing albums all the way back in 2014, and very prolific, and a lot of releases to his name apparently, but this is my first delving into his style. Very much in that kind of classic symphonic prog vein, but you could hear bits of like that kind of more modern indie prog kind of stuff like Deer Hunter and that kind of thing, Coheed. But it's really interesting and quirky. It's silly almost. This is called the Vegetable Gnome trilogy that he's done. So it's really has some interesting quirky story to it. It's a concept record. Tyler does all the instrumentation. It's kind of a one-man band style project. It's symphonic prog mixed with like psychedelia and folk elements. And I love the bouncy kind of catchy nature to the music. Once again, bringing great melodies and hooks to the equation, but not sacrificing complexity and adventurousness and fun in the mix as well. A little goofy and silly in ways, but I think it adds to a charm to this record that I think was a lot of fun to listen through. So I'd recommend it if you're kind of into this goofier, bouncier, kind of fun prog music. I like a lot of those kind of bands, so it was something that grabbed my ear. So I wanted to bring it to your attention. So very interesting. And now back to more of kind of the traditional progressive metal. I won't spend too much time on this because I think I did mention it in one of my previous wrap-ups, but it's Vicinity and their album 8, released back in March, so it's been out for a while. Progressive metal from Norway. The band was founded back in 2006, so very much in that classic Dream Theater vein. Also, I'm thinking about Seventh Wonder. It's not too far removed from what I was just talking about with Terrae as well. Very much in that 90s, early 2000s prog metal scene. Lots of epic moments and virtuoso playing with a good melodic sensibility. I think they do more of kind of the virtuoso playing and going into different instrumental sections more so than Terrae's do, but I do think it's still grounded in melody and is a really solid progressive metal release that I really enjoyed. If you like that classic Dream Theater sound, I don't think you can go wrong with this. And then finally, an excellent prog album that I just listened to, the Windmills album Mindscapes. This is prog from Norway. To me, it's kind of classic prog, has that classic symphonic vibe that a lot of Norwegian bands seem to latch on to. They were founded in 2001, so they've been around the block a little bit of time. The album starts with a very meaty 22-minute prog epic titled Fear, with full prog bombast before things get quiet and focus more on keyboards and vocals. There's some cool proggy instrumental sections, trading flute and keyboard soloing, bringing to mind a bit of like a Jethro Tull feel. It's just pure like neo-prog from, taking its cues from some of the classic 70s band, but also from some of those 80s style neo-prog groups as well, like IQ and Marillion and those types of things. Nice listen, some more laid back moments in certain songs, some really pretty flute work, and some epic symphonic prog peppered in different sections, giving a bit more of this kind of bigger bombast. There's some cool heavy prog moments, especially in the epic and the final track, Nothing in Return, so you get a bit of that heavier vibe. Also, nothing supremely heavy. It doesn't ever veer anywhere close to metal sound, but you get a bit of a heavier vibe with this more intense soundscape. So really great band, really cool record. And if you want something more traditional prog, I think this is probably the best bet in the entire list. So there you go, 20 interesting albums that I think are well worth checking out. Pretty diverse group of things. There's some progressive metal, there's some traditional prog, there's some stuff that's veering into poppier sounds, some jazz fusion. I think it's all really interesting, and there's something well worth listening to for anything on this list. Obviously, that's why I featured it. So thank you guys so much for listening. I know these episodes tend to run a little bit long, but hopefully you found something interesting to listen to. Let me know if any of these are ones that you've loved over the past several months. Let me know your thoughts, or add any additional choices that I may not have talked about still on the channel that you thought I might bring up but haven't yet. Maybe I just haven't come across it yet, or maybe it just hasn't grabbed me and I need another listen. That always happens. So hopefully you guys are enjoying your time out there. And as always, enjoy the music, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me. Hopefully you'll catch me in future episodes. Bye, everybody. Enjoy the music.